The family photograph arrived at the Chicago History Museum in November 2023, part of a large estate donation from the descendants of the Hartwell family, longtime residents of the city's North Side. Among boxes of documents, letters, and memorabilia spanning 4 generations, museum archivist Dr. Emily Santos discovered a formal family portrait that would soon expose one of the most chilling cases of domestic violence in early 20th century Chicago. The sepia-toned photograph, measuring 8x10 inches and mounted on thick cardboard typical of professional studio work, showed what appeared to be a prosperous middle-class family. The studio stamp on the back read, "Morrison Photography, Chicago, Illinois, June 1910. The image depicted a father, mother, and 4 children, arranged in the conventional Victorian style, with formal poses and serious expressions that were standard for the era. At first glance, the photograph seemed unremarkable. The father, identified from estate documents as William Hartwell, stood behind his seated wife, Catherine, with one hand resting on her shoulder. Their children, Margaret, St. Thomas 14, Elizabeth 11, and little James, 8, were positioned around their parents in carefully arranged poses that spoke of middle-class respectability and family harmony. It looked like thousands of other family portraits from that period. Dr. Santos later explained, "The clothing was appropriate for their social class, the studio setting was typical, and the formal arrangement followed all the conventions of early 1910s portrait photography." The donation paperwork indicated that the photograph had belonged to Margaret Hartwell, the eldest daughter, who had kept it throughout her life despite moving to California in the 1920s. A handwritten note in Margaret's distinctive script, found paperclipped to the photo's backing, simply read, "The last picture we took together, MH 1958. What Dr. Santos couldn't have anticipated was that this seemingly innocent family portrait contained visual evidence of a pattern of psychological terror that would culminate in one of Chicago's most notorious domestic tragedies. Dr. Santos was cataloging the Hartwell family photograph for the museum's digital archive when she noticed something that made her pause. Under the bright LED lights of her examination table, magnifying the image for digital scanning, she observed an unsettling detail that hadn't been apparent in casual viewing. William Hartwell's eyes were not looking at the camera, while his wife and children gazed dutifully at the photographer's lens, as was customary for formal portraits. William's gaze was fixed intently on his wife, Catherine, but it wasn't the loving look of a devoted husband. It was something far more disturbing. The intensity of his stare was unlike anything I'd seen in period photography, Dr. Santos noted. Most Victorian and Edwardian portraits show subjects looking directly at the camera, or occasionally gazing off into the middle distance. This was different. This was predatory. Under magnification, William's expression revealed a cold, calculating intensity that seemed completely at odds with the formal nature of the portrait session. His eyes appeared to be boring into his wife's profile with what could only be described as malevolent focus. The contrast between this threatening stare and the conventional family portrait setting created a deeply unsettling effect. More disturbing still was Catherine's posture. While maintaining the required stillness for the long exposure time, her shoulders appeared slightly hunched, as if she were unconsciously trying to make herself smaller. Her hands, folded in her lap, showed white knuckles even in the sepia tones of the old photograph. The children's faces, when examined closely, revealed subtle signs of tension. The 2 older children, Margaret and Thomas, had expressions that seemed forced rather than naturally serious. Their eyes held a wariness that spoke of children who had learned to be constantly alert to adult moods and potential danger. Dr. Santos began to suspect that this family portrait had captured something far more sinister than a routine photography session. Intrigued by the disturbing elements she had observed in the photograph, Dr. Santos began researching the Hartwell family through Chicago's extensive historical records. What she discovered painted a picture of a family living under the shadow of escalating domestic terror. City directories from 1900 to 1915 showed that William Hartwell had been employed as a supervisor at the Chicago stockyards, a position that would have provided a comfortable middle-class income. The family had lived at 1247 North Cleveland Avenue, in a respectable neighborhood that was home to other middle management employees and small business owners. But police records, preserved in the Chicago Police Department archives, told a different story. Dr. Santos found multiple incident reports documenting calls to the Hartwell residence between 1908 and 1910. The reports, written in the terse language typical of the era, described domestic disturbances and family altercations that had required police intervention. What made these reports particularly disturbing was their escalating frequency and severity. The first report, dated March 1908, simply noted a noise complaint from neighbors. By 1909, the reports described injured female and broken household items. The final report, dated May 15, 1910, just 1 month before the family photograph, was taken, documented severe bruising to female, and noted that children appeared frightened and malnourished. Dr. Santos found a handwritten note attached to this final police report. Patrolman O'Sullivan recommends continued monitoring of situation. Subject William Hartwell displays signs of increasing violence and unpredictable behavior. Medical records from Chicago General Hospital revealed that Catherine Hartwell had been treated multiple times between 1908 and 1910 for injuries that were euphemistically described as household accidents. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, who had treated Catherine, had made private notations that suggested he suspected domestic violence, but felt constrained by the social conventions of the era that prevented doctors from intervening in family matters. Dr. Santos's investigation took a crucial turn when she discovered the diary of Agnes Murphy, who had lived next door to the Hartwells on North Cleveland Avenue. The diary, preserved in the papers of the Irish American Heritage Center, provided a first-hand account of the escalating terror within the Hartwell household. Agnes Murphy's entries from 1909 and 1910 painted a picture of a family under siege. "The sounds coming from that house grow more frightening each night," she had written in January 1910. "Poor Catherine looks like a ghost of her former self, and those children creep around like little mice afraid of waking a sleeping cat." The diary revealed that William Hartwell's behavior had become increasingly erratic and threatening. He would stand in his front yard and stare at neighbors' houses for hours at a time, the same cold, calculating stare that Dr. Santos had observed in the family photograph. Children in the neighborhood had begun crossing the street rather than walking past the Hartwell house. "Mr. Hartwell spoke to me yesterday about our fence," Agnes had written in March 1910. "But it wasn't what he said. It was how he looked at me while he said it. There was something wrong in his eyes, something that made my skin crawl. I've seen that look before, in the eyes of a rabid dog that had to be put down." The diary entries revealed that Catherine Hartwell had tried to reach out for help. She had confided in Agnes during brief conversations over the back fence, always looking nervously toward her house, as if expecting her husband to appear at any moment. "She told me yesterday that William has been making lists," Agnes had recorded. "Lists of neighbors, lists of shopkeepers, lists of people he believes have wronged him in some way. She's terrified of what he might be planning." Most chilling was an entry from May 1910, just weeks before the family photograph was taken. "Catherine begged me to take the children if anything should happen to her. She's certain that William is planning something terrible. The way he stares at her now, it's not anger anymore. It's something worse." Dr. Santos tracked down the business records of Morrison Photography, the studio that had taken the Hartwell family portrait. Among the archived appointment books and client records, she found an unusual notation that provided insight into the disturbing dynamics captured in the photograph. James Morrison, the photographer, had made a personal note in his appointment log next to the Hartwell session. "Unusual family dynamic. Father insisted on multiple poses, very specific positioning. Wife appeared nervous throughout session. Recommend avoiding future bookings." Through the Morrison family descendants, Dr. Santos was able to locate a 1963 oral history interview that James Morrison had given to the Chicago Tribune for a feature article about early photography studios. In the interview, Morrison recalled the Hartwell session as one of the most uncomfortable experiences of his career. The father was very controlling about how everyone should be positioned, Morrison had told the interviewer. He kept moving, his wife's chair, adjusting her posture, telling her where to look. But the strangest thing was that he never looked at my camera. He spent the entire session staring at his wife with this intensity that made everyone in the studio nervous. Morrison had also observed the children's behavior during the session. Those kids were scared of their father, he recalled. They jumped every time he spoke, and the older girl kept trying to position herself between her father and the younger children. It was like they were protecting each other from him. Most significantly, Morrison remembered that William Hartwell had paid for multiple copies of the photograph, far more than was typical for family portraits of that era. When Morrison asked about the extra copies, Hartwell had replied that he wanted to make sure everyone would remember how we looked together. The photographer had found this response so unsettling that he had noted it in his personal diary. Something about the way he said it suggested he knew this would be the last photograph of his family. As Dr. Santos delved deeper into the Hartwell family history, she uncovered evidence of William's increasingly systematic pattern of psychological and physical control over his family. Employment records from the Chicago stockyards revealed that his supervisors had begun documenting concerns about his behavior as early as 1909. Foreman Patrick Sullivan had written in William's personnel file, "Hartwell displays concerning aggression toward subordinates. Several complaints from workers about his unpredictable temper and threatening behavior. Recommend reassignment away from direct supervision of others." But it was Catherine's personal correspondence that provided the clearest picture of the psychological terror within the household. Letters to her sister Mary in Milwaukee, preserved in the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, revealed a woman living in constant fear. "William watches me constantly now," Catherine had written in April 1910. "He follows me to the market, times how long I'm gone, questions every person I speak with. He's made me account for every minute of my day, every penny I spend. The children are afraid to speak above a whisper in the house." The letters revealed that William had begun isolating the family from friends and extended relatives. He had forbidden Catherine from attending church services, claiming that the priest was filling her head with dangerous ideas about a woman's place. He had also prevented the children from playing with neighborhood friends, insisting that the family needed to stick together against outside influences. Most disturbing were Catherine's descriptions of William's increasingly bizarre behavior. "He's been rearranging the furniture at night," she wrote, "moving chairs and tables so he can see every part of every room from his favorite chair. He says he needs to maintain proper oversight of his household." The final letter in the collection, dated just 3 days before the family photograph was taken, contained Catherine's most desperate plea. "Mary, I fear for our lives. William speaks constantly about teaching lessons to those who would betray him. He stares at me with such hatred that I cannot sleep. If something should happen to me, please take care of the children." Dr. Santos's investigation revealed that the Hartwell family photograph had been taken during what would prove to be the final weeks of escalating violence before William's complete psychological break. Hospital records, police reports, and witness accounts painted a picture of a man descending into paranoid delusion while maintaining a facade of middle-class respectability. The week following the photography session had been marked by increasingly erratic behavior. Agnes Murphy's diary documented several disturbing incidents. "William stood in his yard for 3 hours yesterday, staring at our house and muttering to himself. When my Patrick asked if he was feeling well, William just smiled that terrible cold smile and said he was watching and learning." School records from the Chicago Public Schools revealed that the Hartwell children had begun showing signs of severe psychological distress. Margaret had been caught stealing food from other students' lunches, leading to a conference with the school principal. When asked about the behavior, Margaret had reportedly broken down crying and begged not to be sent home. The principal, Miss Dorothy Aldrich, had written in her report, "Margaret Hartwell appears malnourished and exhibits signs of chronic anxiety." When questioned about home conditions, she became agitated and refused to answer. Recommend investigation by appropriate authorities. Dr. Santos found evidence that Catherine had made one final, desperate attempt to seek help. Church records from St. Alphonsus Parish showed that she had spoken with Father Michael Kowalski on June 18, 1910, just 2 days before the tragedy occurred. Father Kowalski's private notes, preserved in the parish archives, recorded Catherine's plea. Mrs. Hartwell came to me in great distress, claiming her husband had been making preparations for what she believed would be violence against the family. She spoke of hidden weapons and overheard conversations about final solutions to his problems with disobedient family members. The priest had advised Catherine to contact the police, but she had refused, explaining that previous police interventions had only made William more violent. She feared that any attempt to seek official help would trigger the very violence she was trying to prevent. Father Kowalski had written, "Through meticulous research of police records, newspaper accounts, and witness testimony, Dr. Santos was able to reconstruct the events of June 20th, 1910, the day that William Hartwell's psychological deterioration reached its horrific conclusion." The morning had begun with what neighbors described as an unusual calm at the Hartwell household. Agnes Murphy noted in her diary that she had seen Catherine hanging laundry in the backyard, moving with what seemed like forced normalcy. The children had remained inside the house, which was unusual for a summer morning when neighborhood children typically played outdoors. At approximately 11:30 a.m., neighbors reported hearing William's voice raised in what sounded like a lengthy monologue. Through the open windows, fragments of his speech could be heard, complaints about betrayal, references to teaching lessons, and repeated statements about family loyalty and discipline. Police Sergeant Patrick O'Brien, who had responded to previous calls at the Hartwell residence, was on patrol in the neighborhood when he heard the commotion. His official report described arriving at the scene to find William Hartwell standing on his front porch, still wearing his work clothes from the stockyards, delivering what appeared to be a speech to his family members who were positioned on the porch as if arranged for another photograph. Subject appeared to be lecturing family members about proper behavior and loyalty. O'Brien had written, "Wife and children were seated in chairs on porch, remaining completely still. Initially appeared to be normal family gathering, but something about the scene seemed wrong." What Sergeant O'Brien had witnessed was William's final attempt to recreate the controlled family tableau he had achieved in the photography studio 1 month earlier. But this time, he was the photographer, the director, and the judge of his family's performance. The neighbors who had gathered across the street reported that William's speech had gradually become more agitated and threatening, his voice rising as he paced back and forth in front of his arranged family. Sergeant O'Brien's police report provided the official account of what happened next, though witness testimony from neighbors filled in additional disturbing details about the final moments of the Hartwell family tragedy. As William's speech became increasingly agitated, Catherine had apparently made a movement, perhaps attempting to comfort one of the younger children, that violated his strict staging of the family scene. Witnesses reported hearing William scream, "I said don't move," before the sound of physical violence erupted from the porch. At this point, I approached the residence and observed subject William Hartwell striking his wife Catherine with what appeared to be a wooden chair leg. Sergeant O'Brien recorded, "When I called out for him to stop, subject turned toward me, with the same weapon raised." The confrontation that followed was brief, but decisive. When William charged at the police officer with the makeshift weapon, O'Brien had no choice but to defend himself. His service revolver discharged once, striking William in the chest and killing him instantly. But the true horror of the scene only became apparent when O'Brien reached the porch to check on the condition of the family members. Catherine Hartwell was unconscious from the blow to her head, but she would survive. The children, however, told a story that chilled the veteran police officer. Margaret, the eldest, revealed that her father had forced the family to sit motionless on the porch for over an hour while he delivered his rambling speech about loyalty and betrayal. He had threatened to kill anyone who moved or spoke without permission, and had shown them the axe handle he intended to use as punishment. He said he was going to teach us all a lesson about proper family behavior, Margaret told Sergeant O'Brien. He kept talking about how we looked in the photograph, how perfect we were when we followed his instructions. He wanted us to be that perfect forever. The investigation revealed that William had been planning this final family portrait for weeks, stockpiling weapons and making detailed preparations for what he apparently intended to be a murder-suicide that would preserve his vision of family order and control. Dr. Santos's investigation concluded with the discovery of William Hartwell's personal journal, found hidden in the basement of the family home and preserved in police evidence files. The journal entries from the weeks leading up to the tragedy provided disturbing insight into his psychological state and revealed the true meaning behind his predatory stare in the family photograph. "The picture shows them as they should always be," William had written on June 15, 1910. "Quiet, obedient, arranged according to proper order. Catherine knows her place. The children understand their roles. This is how a family should look when everyone follows the rules." The journal revealed that William had become obsessed with the family photograph, studying it daily and using it as a template for how he expected his family to behave at all times. He had begun staging similar arrangements at home, forcing family members to pose for extended periods while he observed them for signs of defiance or independence. Catherine and the 3 surviving children were eventually taken in by Catherine's sister Mary in Milwaukee. Medical records showed that all 4 suffered from severe psychological trauma that required years of treatment. Margaret never married and spent her life working as a seamstress, rarely speaking about her childhood experiences. The family photograph that had captured William's menacing stare became evidence in the police investigation and was eventually returned to the family. Margaret kept it throughout her life, not as a memento of family happiness, but as a reminder of survival and resilience. This photograph documents one of the earliest recorded cases of what we would now recognize as systematic domestic psychological abuse, Dr. Santos wrote in her published research. William Hartwell's predatory stare, captured by the camera, reveals the calculating nature of his control over his family members. The Chicago History Museum now displays the photograph as part of an exhibition on domestic violence in early 20th century urban America. A placard beside the image reads, "Sometimes a family portrait captures more than just a moment in time. It preserves evidence of lives lived in fear." Catherine Hartwell lived until 1954, never remarrying but dedicating her life to helping other women escape abusive situations. In her final interview with social workers, she spoke about the family photograph. "People always said we looked like such a proper family in that picture. They couldn't see what I saw every day. The way he looked at us like we were possessions to be arranged and controlled. That photograph shows the truth if you know how to look for it."